What's going on YouTube? This is Rybo back at the fake bench again today, and today I have another cut or carry knife review. Today looking at a knife I never thought that I would get to review. This is the Grimsmo Norseman. It's a very famous knife, one that I've seen on other YouTube reviews and Instagram and places like that for many years, but one that I never really ever thought that I would see in person, let alone review. But thanks to the incredibly generous knife community, this is on loan, and I was able to carry it for a few days and give my thoughts. So that is very exciting. Let me go ahead and do some size comparisons. If you haven't seen my videos in a little while, or if you're new to the channel, I had a tree fall in my workshop and take out my bench and tools and everything. So I'm a little short-handed in terms of, the measurements that I would typically do. And I'm not really, $1,000 knife guy. I think this retails around $950, $960, something like that, I believe. That's really way out of my typical ballpark in terms of knives. So I don't know a ton about this class of knives, and so I'm just going to give my review based on carrying it for a few days and relative to the other things that I carry. I'm not going to be super specific on the technical details and probably missing a lot of things because I'm a scrub, but there you go. So let's do some size comparisons. So I think a good size comparison is the Spyderco PM2. So you can see it's a larger knife for sure. I will also throw up the Spidey Chef here, and because that's a little bit funky. Also the large Sabenza 21, which is a favorite knife of mine. So you can see those are, I think, pretty good comparison, and I actually did a head-to-head on those. And then because it's my channel, I had to throw up the K-Bar Dozier, because who doesn't love a good juxtaposition? Can't even say it. One thing that I will note about this knife, since I don't have calipers and whatnot, is the incredible thinness. This is a very, very thin knife. This is titanium and very thin scales, and that's one of the first things that I noticed about the Norseman when I started carrying it and when I started handling it, is just how super, super thin it is. It is taller in terms of the handle and obviously the blade, but it's very, very thin. All right, so things that I like about the Grimsmo Norseman. So first of all, the thinness. One of the first things that I noticed, but it actually carries fairly well for the size. It is a little bit wider. It's a pretty long knife, but it is super, super thin, and that's really, really nice. It's nice because it doesn't really impact the ergonomics. In fact, I think it feels really, really good because it does have a little bit more width to it. Reminds me in a lot of ways, and I should have had it ready, of the Cold Steel Code 4, which is a knife that is also taller with thinner handles. And so those two kind of reminded me of each other, both in kind of the, ergonomics, but also just the width and kind of scale of the handles. So that's definitely something that I like. Next thing, the action. I mean, you can't talk about a Grimsmo Norseman without talking about the drop shutty action. It is super, super smooth. Probably the smoothest action that I have ever dealt with a knife. Drop shutty, really, really nice. Flies open really, really nicely. Big fan of the action, and I mean, it's probably the defining characteristic of a Norseman. And so while that's not one of the main things that I judge a knife on, because I think it's just one of those nice kind of tactile feel things, that's really, really cool, and the action is definitely great on this knife. Other things that I like, so the blade, for all its funkiness, I'll probably have some things I like and dislike about the blade. But the blade, for all of its funkiness, I think does a few things really, really well. I mean, if you look at up here, you've got just the world's best box cutter. There are some tasks like slicing, one of the things, I've got young twins. I'm making formula bottles all day long. This is great for cutting open the seal of a new formula box. There are just some like everyday carry tasks that this knife, and particularly this part of the blade up here, really, really excel at. And so for all of the funkiness, there is a decent bit of utility there. I also kind of like this curve up here. It is weird. I'm not sure, how I feel about the aesthetics of the entire knife, but I actually like that this kind of takes away some of the weight of the blade, and it does kind of match the overall look of the knife, and so I do like that. Other things I like, I think the ergonomics are pretty good. I'll have a few things to say about that later, but the ergonomics are pretty good on the knife, with that thin handle. But also the finger grooves I think are pretty on point. I'll have a few things to say, but I think they're pretty nice. And then the lock bar is very, very nice. This knife is very, very easy to disengage, and that combined with the action makes this knife very fidgety. Kind of makes it fun to open and close, which is not something that's needed in a knife, but something that's nice to have for us nerds. And so those are really the things that I like about it. Unfortunately, my list of things that I like about this knife are not super long, which is unfortunate, but I also don't really know what I'm talking about with knives of this price, so I'm probably just missing a lot of things. Things that I don't like about the knife, I have several. So I talked about the utility of this part and really this part of the blade. Unfortunately, I have not yet found utility in the blade overall. So taken as a whole, I have not found a great deal of practical application for this type of blade with this kind of recurve, and then you've got this up here. My EDC tasks, if you will, are fairly limited at the moment, but it's really like, cutting a peach or an apple, or cutting food, opening packages, doing that kind of stuff, cutting rope, whatever. And this does a couple of those things really well. Like I said, it's an excellent box cutter. But I've had a lot of difficulty with this part of the blade. The actual slicing on this blade, to me, has not been all that impressive. Push cuts have been kind of difficult, actually, to get past this point up here. And overall, just hasn't really impressed me. So it's not one of those, like, it's not an EDC knife, and I'm not sure that it's really trying to be, but I've heard a lot about the surprising utility of the Norseman, and unfortunately in the few days that I had it, I don't really get that. So again, I'm probably missing something, but that's just my impressions. Other things that I don't like, I don't understand the thumb stud here. It's a flipper knife. I've not really had a lot of luck with the thumb stud because you end up pushing down on this lock bar. I don't find it all that comfortable. I actually think that it's very, very similar to the Sebenza thumb stud, incredibly similar. I didn't actually realize how similar it was, which I'm not a huge fan of the Sebenza thumb stud, but I don't think you need anything besides a flipper on this knife. I think that it adds this kind of weird hump, and it just, I don't know, it doesn't really work for me. Other things, the ergonomics are okay. I mentioned before, I think the ergonomics back at the back end of the knife here are really nice. This part up here, this is frustrating to me. It's just where my hand falls, but my hand tends to fall on it instead of back here where the jimping is. And so I find this fairly uncomfortable. Again, I think if you were to remove that thumb stud, you could do something a little bit better there. Nah, just not for me. Everyone's probably going to differ a little bit there. Other things I don't like, I think the pocket clip is one of the worst pocket clips that I've had recently on a knife, and that's a pretty bold statement, and you can agree or disagree, but I have had nothing but problems with this pocket clip. I have to actually look at my pants and push this onto the pocket and focus on getting my pants underneath this small lip right here, because it's a very tight clip. There's not a ton of spring tension here. It's a little bit too short, I think, and you don't have a huge ramp. And so I think this pocket clip is probably a great example of something that chose form over function, because I've had really no end of issues. It's a pain. I've tried it on gym shorts, I've tried it on jeans, I've tried it on khaki shorts. I have problems with it everywhere I go, and it's kind of hard to extract from the pocket because it is so tight. So not really a fan of that. Other things I dislike, for what I said about the lock bar, and I do, I do stand behind the fact that this is very, very easy to disengage, and that's really, really nice. My problem is it's a bit disconcerting to me. It seems a little too easy to disengage. The lockup is fairly shallow, and this does have over travel stop, which That's great, and I definitely see why you would need it on a knife like this. But it really makes me concerned that that this very, very expensive knife needs to rely on the over travel stop. It makes me concerned that it's going to bend this way and it's not going to age super well. And it's just a very, very thin piece of titanium there. I mean, if you look down here where the relief is, that is super, super thin. I'd also prefer for the relief to be on the inside. I think it just looks a lot better. And on a knife like this, I don't know, that's a little detail that I would look for. But yeah, I mean, functionally probably not an issue, but it just makes me a little bit concerned for how the knife is going to age. Other things, I do get a fair bit of lock stick. Nothing, nothing like the Spidey Chef, which is pretty bad. And it's not a problem. It's more just you just feel it a little bit. But that is something that I also notice on the Norseman. Let's see, anything else? Oh yeah, one other thing. The other thing that drives me nuts about this knife is the lack of helpful jimping on the flipper tab. The flipper tab, as you can see, if my camera were to focus, is fairly small, which is totally fine. But the jimping is similar to the jimping over here, which is fairly rounded. If you compare that to something like the Sebenza, where you have more of this aggressive jimping, this to me, and again, I am, my hands are unique and everyone's kind of going to have their own experience. But to me, this knife is sometimes hard to deploy. Sometimes it's difficult to get a real good grip on this, and you do feel like you're putting a significant amount of pressure to get this to deploy. Some of that could be hand placement back here on the lock bar. But I think really the thing, and I don't know what's going on with my camera right now, but I think the thing that could really help this is to have more aggressive jimping right there. You just have those two kind of rounded notches, and it's just not enough to get a good handle on it. So those are the things that I don't like about the Norseman. So where does that leave me? Cut or carry for this? For me, this is a definite cut. I don't get this knife. To me, and again, you are welcome to disagree with me. To me, this is a form over function knife, and I'm a function over form knife guy. This kind of makes me angry in every way. I think I would prefer something like this in terms of a nicer knife almost every day, because I think that this is very utilitarian. I've yet to find the utility in the Norseman. I think it's totally fine for a knife to be kind of an art knife or a special knife. But for me and my tastes, Norseman is not for me. It's a very well-made knife. I think there's a lot of great craftsmanship in it, a lot of cool details about it, and I'm sure if I spent more time with it, I would discover some of those things. But for me, this would not be a knife that I would really look for as a grail or a future knife. So hope you've enjoyed this review, and I will see you next time.